nursing's kind of the same thing. They want to know, are you going to quit when it's hard? Do you learn quickly? Like, nursing is that.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. On today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Zach, a nurse and now the president of a successful financial planning practice in Athens, Georgia. Zach is credentialed as a board-certified financial planner and a chartered financial consultant, and has a passion for empowering others to live abundantly. Beyond his professional achievements, Zach has been happily married to his wife, Sydney, for nearly 8 years and is a proud father to their 2-year-old daughter. Zach also loves spending time in the outdoors, golfing and hunting, and has even conquered the Appalachian Trail as a thru hiker. Join us as Zach shares his journey from nursing to financial planning. Zach, welcome to the show.
Hey, Audrey, thanks for having me. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for joining me. I am particularly excited to share your story because I feel like the jump from nursing to financial planning is a bit of a unique one.
Yeah, I would say that it's not a super traditional path, but it is one that I feel like others could do pretty easily. So
yeah, I know. And I'm excited to share bits of your story because it sounds like it's maybe not quite as hard as some might think. And sounds like there's some ways to do it that takes the burden off of, having to start all over in your career.
For sure. Yeah, I would say the job itself, I always tell people it's not easy. It's not as hard as being a nurse is, of course, but the transition was a lot more doable than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you just mentioned it's not as hard as being a nurse, which
Yeah.
I think is a very true statement. A lot of us who have moved away from the bedside, we bring a different perspective to the workplace because of where we've been, and we understand, what life and death urgency really means versus just like this deliverable has an urgent deadline kind of urgency.
Yeah, for sure.
So talk to me about your career and starting as a nurse. What kind of nurse were you? And what was the catalyst for you even beginning to think about leaving a nursing position?
Yeah, so I started my career at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I was primarily PICU, floated to the NICU. I'm sure as many nurses will understand, you don't always get to stay on the floor that you were trained to do. So I was there for 2 years. And honestly, Audrey, the only reason I was there for 2 years is because in Georgia, at least, new grads have to sign a 2-year contract. And so it sounds bad to say, but 6 to 8 months in, I was like, man, I don't know that this is what God called me to do. I feel like I'm not supposed to be doing this, but I also don't know what I am supposed to be doing. And I think the big driver for me leaving is like, I loved helping people. Like I loved taking care of people's kids and like the emotion involved in that and the responsibility that we held. But I felt like, and at least at the time, maybe this has changed, maybe it hasn't, but like what we were being paid and the responsibility we were being asked to take on for like how much we had to do didn't really seem equal to me. And it's not always about the money, but part of it is like you have to live, you have to pay bills, everybody has goals and dreams. And it's like, wow, I am I'm taking care of dying children for $27 an hour. Can I not just monetarily do this, but can I emotionally do this for like the next 40 years? And the answer was no for me.
Yeah. Yeah. What made you go into nursing in the first place? Was there a point in time where you thought maybe that was the right thing for you for your full career?
Yeah, it was. I think, I went to Mercer University as pre-med, and I was like, "Well, I don't think that I really actually want to be a surgeon and graduate when I'm 35 and all of that." And I knew that I wanted to help people. My grandmother passed when I was in college, and she had really great nurses. And I was like, man, if I could have that kind of impact on somebody's life, that would be really cool. And, 18, 19-year-old Zach was like, oh, and I only have to work 3 days a week, 3 nights a week. Like, how hard can that be? I was like, you're telling me that I can help people and only work 3 days a week? That's awesome. And so it was, and I'm not bashing on the nursing field. Like, Sydney is a nurse. My mother-in-law's a nurse. My father-in-law's a nurse. My sister-in-law's a nurse. But for me, it was just, I realized pretty quickly that maybe I should have done my due diligence, maybe in exploring other career options, like with the natural skill sets that I have.
Yeah. It's a hard thing to go into college at like 18, 19 and put a pin in
Yeah.
what you want to major in.
Why it's wild that we ask kids to do that. And I know most 18-year-olds would say they're not kids, but like being in my 30s, looking back at me being 18, I'm like, yeah, I was a kid. So
Yes.
very, very different. Very, very different.
Absolutely. And it's so true. Like, I even remember reflecting on this in my first job as a new grad. Like, holy cow, I graduated school essentially and, within a couple of months. And I now have the ability to literally save a human life. And I mean, I wasn't even making 27 an hour. I think in Alabama, I was making closer to 22 an hour.
Oh
But
man.
it is wild, and unfortunately you see this in professions that do make a difference, like teachers and firefighters and
Yeah,
EMS and, nurses are grouped in with that.
for
So
sure.
it is kind of unfortunate. And I think that to your point of nursing being hard, it is more than just the going to work 3 days a week and doing tasks. Like, it is the emotional weight and everything that you're doing, that you're carrying every single day.
Yeah, and that's super tough. And I know you felt that as well, which is like what motivated you to start this. There's a lot of jobs and careers you can kind of leave that there. And I don't know if you felt the same way, but I would just find myself constantly going home thinking about patients. What could I have done differently? Did I say the right thing here? What do you even say to somebody when their kid dies? I don't know. It was just like, for people who are emotional like I am, that can be a very powerful thing. And it can also be like a really detrimental thing to you. So it kind of goes both ways.
The worst was when I would come home after a hard shift and try to get some sleep. And in my dreams, I was
Yeah.
still in that patient's room,
Yeah.
going through everything all over again in my head.
Yeah. That I
um,
remember that. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so you decided this probably isn't going to be it for me for the next 40 years. What
Sure.
was next? How did you start looking at new opportunities? What were you searching for? And where did you land?
Yeah. So the end of 2018, Sid and I were travel nursing at that point, and I told her, I was like, hey, this is like not gonna be it for me. And she felt that to a certain extent, maybe not as much at the time. She was doing labor and delivery and was still enjoying it. We didn't have kids or anything, so that was a little easier. But I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I know it's not this, but it's a lifelong dream of mine to hike the Appalachian Trail. And we had talked about that like when we were dating and stuff too. And she was like, well, what if we like both take a sabbatical and go do that? And sounded like a great idea at the time. So we both left our jobs early 2019. We trained for the AT, and we pretty much spent like March through August walking in the woods and sleeping in a tent. And we used a lot of that time just to like reflect and pray and be like, what do I want to do? Like, where am I being called to go right now? And before I had left for the trail, I had a headhunter reach out to me and was like, hey, you should consider financial advising. Because I had done like an online career assessment type thing. And I guess they had found me through that. I don't really know how headhunters find people. But I was like, I'm a nurse. I don't do financial advising, but I appreciate it. Thank you. So we went and hiked, did that. We finished the trail the end of August. And I still had no idea what I really wanted to do. And it was around that time, one of the big pharmaceutical companies had reached out to me because I had been connected to one of their managers via like a friend. And they were like, hey, we'd love for you and your nursing expertise to come help us in our diabetes division. We think that like we could really use you to like, not like as a translator, but like, how to talk to doctors, what they're looking for, things like that. And I was like, so I could get out of nursing, but I could still use like my nursing knowledge. Like that kind of sounded like a great merge of those two worlds. And they were like, yeah, all you have to do is move to Portland, Oregon. And I was like, well, no, I don't really want to do that. And then they showed me what they would be paying me. And I was like, yeah, I'll move like tomorrow if you want me to. So that's how I ended up getting out of nursing. And I wasn't necessarily, again, chasing money. I wanted to, in my mind, I was like, well, I can still help people just in a different way, but now I'm being compensated what I consider to be fairly. And ultimately it ended up kind of being the opposite of nursing, where in nursing, I felt like I was making an impact, but not being like compensated adequately. In working for big pharma, I was not making an impact and being paid a lot of money to do it. And so I was like, well, I don't really know what to do here. But that's
Yeah.
how I got out of it.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think that nurses, most of us, generally speaking, we are people who have that strong desire to make an impact and feel fulfilled through our work.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's true of every professional out there. Some people are fine going to work and doing whatever it is. They don't really
Yeah.
care as long as it's paying the bills. And I think that for us, of course, salary is important. And to your point, like it creates a certain lifestyle, but
Sure.
we still want that to mean that we're making an impact and we have fulfillment through what we're doing. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. Like, how long did it take you to kind of recognize that the tables have turned a little bit there?
I think for the first few months, I was kind of like in the honeymoon phase of it. And then the longer you did it, I'm like, these doctors don't really care how efficient or inefficient a medication is unless it's like covered by a PBM, right? Like if it's on the insurance, I don't care what you're selling. And then just some of the things that we saw transpire through the pharmaceutical industry. This was pre-COVID, so like that whole shebang hadn't even happened yet. But I got disenchanted with it. I would say maybe around July-ish. I started November of 2019. And I would say like by July of 2020, we were in the thick of COVID. And in Oregon, they were like really in the thick of COVID. I'd kind of known this wasn't for me. And when I was career searching, somebody had told me like, hey, you pick a job based on the 3 I's, right? And you may be familiar with this. It's income, impact, and independence, right? So my first job, ton of impact, very little income, absolutely no independence. My second job, a decent amount of independence, really good income. My impact was super low. And so you kind of have to rank them like in order of priority for you. But I just didn't feel super fulfilled by that. And maybe COVID accentuated that, right? Because like we weren't allowed to go into doctor's offices anymore. And it was a lot of like hey doc, will you Zoom with me about this medication? And they're like, no, I will not. So that could have accelerated it, but I would say maybe like 10 months into it, I was like, okay, this can't be it either.
So, how did you circle back to financial planning?
Yeah. Again, I went and like took one of those like online career quizzes. And one thing that nurses, or I should say, most nurses like have in common is like they really care about people. Most of them are very good communicators. Like we love people. And so they was like, hey, you should explore like these fields, right? And like sales was one of them. It doesn't really matter what you're selling, financial planning, etc. And all financial planning really is, Audrey, is like you can learn the knowledge of financial planning, but you're really selling yourself to people. Because if I'm going to work with somebody, I'm 30, right? Let's say that I work with somebody our age, we're going to be together the next 40 years. You better like me and you better trust me. Right. So, you're just selling yourself. And so I was like, okay, financial planning. What are the top financial planning firms? I called the firm that I was with at the time. I had a financial planner at that time. And I, I don't know if this is the normal way to go about it, but I just like cold applied to like a bunch of places. I think I cold applied to 7 different firms. I got offers from all of them and ultimately made a decision to come back closer to my hometown near Athens, Georgia, just to be closer to family. And the firm that I ended up with, I felt like they really aligned with like my core values as a person. During the final interview, they actually asked that Sydney join the interview. So they're like, hey, you're about to move across the country. Your husband's going to switch fields totally. Like, how do you feel about anything? Do you have questions? Let's connect you with other spouses in the office so that you can have people to connect with. And
Wow.
that made a huge, I'm like, family is like my number one thing. Like, if you take care of my girls, you're like A-okay in my book. So that was huge for me. And the firm that I ended up at, they sponsored all of my education. So when I obviously have like a BSN, so finance doesn't really fit anywhere in that. And so they sponsored, because in our world you have to be sponsored to like take these licenses and exams and things like that. They sponsored me to get all of my investment licensing, all of my insurance licensing. A little bit later on in my career, they sponsored me to go back to school to get like my chartered financial consultant designation, my CFP designation. And so they just made it really easy on me to like learn the knowledge and the skills. And I had great mentors. And so when I first started, I like every prospect or client that I was trying to bring on, I would work with a more senior advisor so that I could also learn from them. Because in nursing or literally anything, like the textbook is just so different than real life.
Right.
And so I was able to take my knowledge from the textbook, but they were able to say like, okay, like in this situation, here's what we should be thinking about, the questions we should be asking. Because when you're dealing with people's money, it's not life or death like nursing, thank God. But if you were to ask most people what's probably second most important to them, it might be their money.
Right.
And so you really don't want to screw that up. And so I just felt very supported in making that transition. And I tell people all the time who are thinking about making the leap, it's like, we can teach you anything you want to know knowledge wise. I can't teach you
Yes.
how to be a good person. I can't teach you how to work hard. I can't really teach you communication skills, maybe to a certain extent, but like I can teach you anything you want to know about money. Like I can teach you math. I can teach you all that
Yeah.
stuff. But like that's why I think nurses would do so well in this field. I really, really do. I just think, at least in my experience, I had put myself in a box beforehand, being like, well, if I'm not going to do bedside, I better do something with a science degree. And like, who freaking cares? Like, nobody, not one
Yeah.
time has a client ever been like, oh, you have a BSN? Are you qualified to tell me what to do? I'm like, I have like 30 other degrees too. So, yes. But like, it just doesn't matter, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so I have a lot of questions. The first question is, Did you have any interest in finance to begin with, or any baseline knowledge there prior to taking an online quiz that suggested that finance might be good for you?
A little. Like, and when I say a little, I mean like I watched the stock market occasionally and I knew that I hated paying taxes. But like outside of those two things, no. Like I really didn't, right? And what I've come to find out is that good financial planning is a lot more than investment management. Like when I got into this world, I was like, okay, so I'm going to manage people's money, I'm going to help them grow it. And like if you're doing a good job of this, it's so much more than it's like helping people walk through the biggest financial decisions of their life. It's helping them create a guided financial plan so that it's like, hey, if I follow this, I am confident that like everything that I want will come true. Right. And so like that's what became more apparent to me, but like the actual like numbers and nitty gritty, like what I call like the nerdy details of financial planning, I did not give a crap about when I first started looking, like not even a little.
That's funny. And I mean, I think that you just drew such a good parallel between what you're doing and like maybe what partially drew you to nursing is like you are that person in those critical moments, whether it is a financial decision or whether it is getting a family through a traumatic situation with their child in the PICU.
Yeah,
Like you obviously are very good at being that person. And again, you're getting to make that impact too. And so I can see a lot of the similarities and the soft skills that you might need there as far as communication, your ability to build trust and establish a relationship with people. We do that as bedside nurses every
for sure.
day. And those are relationships that we're starting from scratch in the most stressful moment of someone's life.
Yeah.
At least once you build a relationship, you get to hang on to them for a while and not just start over with someone new the next day.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the best part about it. Because, like, in the ICU, we'd have kids for 24 hours to sometimes, like, unfortunately, like a month or two at a time, right? These things, like, and I don't know how old you are, Audrey. I would assume we're about the same age, but like,
Mm-hmm.
if we worked together, like, I get to watch you grow for the next 30, 40 years. And yes, there is a lot of trust in that. And that can be scary, but I kind of find solace in that because they are trusting me to make sure everything's okay, right? Like a young couple wants to buy their first house and they're going to drop 100 grand on a down payment. I better make sure that I did my math right, right? Like a 65-year-old couple, they want to retire, and I told them they could, and that they confidently could spend $12,000 a month and not run out of money. I better make sure that I like did that correctly, right? So
Right.
it is a lot of pressure, but like I jokingly say all the time, like nobody's dying today. Like this is like the fun side of everything. And there's hard conversations like, hey, you can't do everything you want to do, but like we can help people figure out what their biggest priorities are, and we get to be there for that. Like we get to be there when people welcome their kids into the world. We get to be there when they buy their first house. We get to be there when they retire. And that's really like really cool for me
Yeah,
because
definitely.
yeah, going back to the three eyes, it's like, okay, great. I have all the impact that I wanted to have. I'm making the income that I wanted to be making. And the independence thing is really big for me. And so
Mm-hmm.
the way like our practice is structured, I get to run my own practice with my own employees. I can work from home. I can work from Montana. I can go into the office every day. Like to me, that's so big. 'Cause I'll never miss a T-ball game. I'll never miss a dance recital. And I have a lot of friends who are in nursing, and it's like, well, I can't go do that. I got called in to work an overtime shift tonight from 7P to 7A. It's like that freaking sucks. Like
Yeah.
that's like not a world that I wanted to live in. And we do like we need nurses, obviously, but like maybe we should take care of them a little bit better for like the sacrifices that they're having to make every day.
It's an important sacrifice to acknowledge.
Yeah.
I think I kind of, even as a nurse myself, I think I took it for granted that, when I go to work every day, I'm in this building for 12 and a half, 13 hours, and I'm not doing anything else, like I'm not calling my mom or checking on a kid or taking them to soccer practice or whatever. And then you have weekends and holidays, of course, to think about. And it's like, well, I've got to choose Thanksgiving or Christmas this year. Which one is it going to be?
Oh,
And
yeah.
as soon as you get out of that, like that was such a game changer for me in a larger way than I guess expected, because again, I think I just kind of took this for granted because nursing was all I had ever done.
Yeah.
And once I started working remotely and I realized, because at first I was like, oh, I'm going to have to work 5 days a week now.
Yeah.
But then I was like, wait, these 5 days a week, I can actually take time for myself during the day. Like if I
Yeah.
need to go to an appointment or drop a kid off at school or go to a practice or whatever, I can do that. Not to mention, I'm off by 5 o'clock is pretty standard. And I have the rest of that evening to spend with my family versus as a nurse, you're getting up at the break of dawn or when your family is about to go to sleep
Yeah.
and you are out of commission as a, you know, mom, sister, wife, whatever, for the next 12 and a half hours. And then when you come home, there's only enough time left to basically give yourself some food, take a shower, and go to sleep and start it all over for
Yeah.
the next shift. So I think that was something that, 3 to 5 days a week, I'm like, I take it any day if this is what my 5 days a week looks like.
Yeah, 100%. And like you'll get to have holidays with your kids and there's no like cuz Sydney stays at home now with our daughter, but she was a night shift nurse when Sloan was first born. And it was like, okay, I get home from work, you pass the kid to me, we kiss each other goodbye, have like a 15-minute dinner, see ya. And I just like this may sound weird coming out of a financial advisor's mouth, but like money's not everything, right? Like I think we've kind of tricked ourselves into being like, oh, we have to do this so that we can have an extra like 50 grand a year, 60 grand a year. I'm like, what? Like, what's your quality of life worth?
Yeah.
Especially for nurses. Like if Sydney was getting paid 200 grand a year, I might be like, hey, suck it up a little bit. But like if you're getting paid like 60 grand a year, like is that worth your quality of life and like the crap that you have to deal with every day? I didn't think so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's important for a nurse who is considering leaving the bedside or looking at other careers. I think that considering that piece of work-life balance and where that weighs into your decision is important. And on one hand, it's hard if you don't know what it's like to have that kind of work-life balance.
Yeah.
It's hard to really factor that in because you don't know what you don't know, which is part of the reason that I'm excited to get this podcast and stories out there, because it's like, let people tell you what it's like, hear it from multiple people, because there are like every job is going to have its own set of requirements and a little bit of a different work-life balance, and you just find what works for you. But generally speaking, you're not missing holidays, you're not working weekends, you're not working nights. So there's definitely something to consider there in that decision.
For sure. And sometimes like we become prisoners to our own comfort, right? It's like I know so many nurses I know a lot of nurses who love nursing. So let's start there. But I also know a lot of nurses who are kind of more comfortable with the devil they know versus the devil they don't. Because it is a big leap to say like, hey, I'm going to leave what I went to school for 4 years and was trained to do something totally different. And there are things that you can do that are still like science related, like pharmaceutical sales, med device sales, NP, PA, CRNA. Like you could do any of those things too. And those things rock. Like those things are awesome. But a lot of people are like, I don't know what I can do that I don't have to go back to school for that's like going to fulfill one of my three eyes, essentially, right? Or two of the three, hopefully, like in a great world.
Yeah, and part of that too is like with the going back to school, I thought that if I left clinical bedside nursing, I was essentially going to have to take a huge step backwards and start over. And I
Yeah.
didn't even really define what start over meant in my mind, but it felt like big step backwards. And what I think that is so interesting about your story in particular is that you found an employer who sponsored your education, right? So
Yeah.
that takes one more barrier down. And of course, there's still like the time commitment that goes with that. But,
Sure.
that's one less thing that you're worrying about because a lot of people think, school, that means loans, that means more debt. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't seem like the right path for where I'm at. So I think that it's really interesting to find that there are actually a lot of opportunities where, whether there's more school involved or not, the barriers to switching might not actually be as great as they feel like they are.
For sure. And sometimes like you're your own biggest enemy in that, right? Like you just get in your own way. And for financial advising specifically, this field is only going to grow more and more. We were doing some research the other day. I think the average age of a financial advisor in this country is like 57 and a half. And so you got like all these, I jokingly say like old white dudes in suits and ties that are going to be calling it quits in the next 10 years. And who replaces them, right? You have a whole generation of people who, they're going on YouTube and they're getting some sort of financial information and they're scrolling their Instagram feed and they're getting a different piece of feedback. And I think in like a robot and AI driven world, people do crave like some human connection, like, oh, I know this person. I know Zach and his family, and I know that he likes to go to Braves games on the weekends, and like I trust him. Like I trust him to take care of me and my family. And really good nurses already have that built in to them, or else they wouldn't have very good bedside manner. And so I think like a lot of the soft skills that you talk about pretty easily translate. The knowledge piece is definitely like work to pick up. Like I spent a long time doing that, but it's like, come on, man. Like it's so doable. You just got to get out of your own way sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about this a little bit earlier too, but it's those hard skills, it's that new knowledge that you can learn. Like it's the soft skills that get you there.
Yeah.
And one of those soft skills that nurses come with is we tend to be pretty quick learners. Like we can pick up on new things pretty well. We're pretty resourceful too. So if you have the soft skills that make you good at a job, that's what I think is really important. And then
Yeah.
if it's something that you're motivated to do, the information is out there, whether it's financial planning and you're needing to take like actual courses and get new licensing,
Yeah.
or if it's just marketing, for example,
Sure.
and you learn by doing and listening to podcasts and reading information on the internet and just consuming knowledge.
Yeah.
It's all, we live in this digital age where all of this information is here for us. You just have to go and get it. So yeah, I think that acknowledging the soft skills is super, super important. Did I hear you correctly when you said that all of the places that you cold applied to called you back?
Yeah. Which may have been a COVID thing, right? Like I was applying in the heat of COVID and maybe people were just dying for, I don't know. But yeah, it was, I was very blessed in that sense. And I've made a lot of connections. Like I was very social in college.
Mhm.
I had a LinkedIn, even though I didn't need one as a nurse, which that's something that I would encourage everybody to do, whoever's listening. Like
Yes.
just, it's not what you know, it's who you know, because like I had a foot in the door at most places that I applied, whether it was like, hey, I knew Zach from college, he's a really solid dude, or like whatever, right? But yeah, I did get offers, which again, I'm very blessed, but it allowed me to make a decision on where I wanted to go more based on like core values and like who I saw myself working with for the next 40 plus years.
Yeah, definitely. It is all about who you know. And I was told early in my career, before it mattered, that your network is your net worth. And I was like, what does that even mean? I don't understand.
I
I'm a
know.
nurse. Networking is not a part of something that we do. Like, I didn't network in college. I didn't network after college. I just went to school. I got my degree. I got my license and I got a job. And
Yeah.
that's really all there was to it. And so building that network is important. And you mentioned LinkedIn too, which nurses, we don't need a LinkedIn. A lot of us
No.
don't have one. I think when I was a nurse, it said I was a nurse, and that was about all it said.
Yeah.
But it is a really powerful social network for your career. And I learned the power of even just like meeting people on LinkedIn. Like, it's still kind of funny in my mind that LinkedIn is a social platform, but the people that I'm connecting with on LinkedIn, I'm generally actually meeting them
Yeah.
like virtually,
Like
where I'm
you
having a
and I.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny because we're so used to this like social media world where, you just click follow and that's it. You kind of lurk in the feed.
Yep.
But LinkedIn is different. People are actually very willing and ready and expecting to connect live with people. Like, that's what it's there for. So
Exactly.
I do think that nurses should use their LinkedIn. And I think that that's harder if you've never done that.
Sure.
With Pivot Path, I offer some guidance on like building your LinkedIn to where you can kind of talk about your value in ways that translate, because nurses do way more than starting IVs and,
Yeah.
giving meds. So these soft skills that we're talking about in this conversation, those are the things that are going to be important to make sure that are shining through on your LinkedIn profile.
For sure. Yeah. It's one of those things you're like, you don't think you need it till you need it. But that's why a lot of what you're doing, like you're going to be the network for a lot of nurses who are like, hey, I haven't done this beforehand and now I kind of need it. I highly encourage LinkedIn for any nurse out there who's like, even if you love nursing and you think you're going to do it forever, it cannot hurt to just know people. It can't.
Absolutely. And, all of the guests coming on this podcast are a testament to the fact that there are plenty of nurses on LinkedIn. We might not be doing the traditional, hands-on patient care anymore. Yeah. There are plenty of those too, but there are a lot of nurses doing really cool things on LinkedIn, so it's worth a look.
No, for sure. Even just to spark some ideas and ask them how they made the jump, right?
Definitely. Well, so looking back on your overall journey, like I know that we've kind of dropped a couple of gems of wisdom through this conversation, but if you were to look back at yourself and you were in that PICU position, feeling like you weren't quite made for that, not adequately compensated, kind of feeling like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah.
What advice would you give?
Phew. I would probably give myself the advice of like to not box myself in and that I'm more valuable than I think I am. To your point, you'd say like, hey, nurses do more than just start IVs. But at that time I was like, well, I know how to, start an IV. I can do chest compressions. I can hang any drip in the world. I don't know if anybody outside of these four walls cares about that, but it matters here. And so if I was talking to my younger self, I would just like, hey, a lot of the skills that you do have are so easily translatable to other things. And it's not even skills that I learned in nursing school. It's just the type of person nursing attracts. Like you had mentioned, like most nurses care about people. Most nurses are very good at communicating with others. Most nurses like have a desire to be liked. They want like, and maybe that goes back to like, I don't know if you had this, like getting a bedside report card and then like that's part of your review to see if you get a 10-cent raise or not. I don't know. But like we want to be the best. And like Ask any corporate America CEO what they look for in an employee, and it's somebody who's self-motivated, they want to be the best, and they're a team player, right? That is nursing to a T. And so like I wish that had clicked in my brain a little bit earlier, because I was very like doubtful and had like I was like, I'm gonna have to go to freaking CRNA school if I want to do anything. And I love CRNAs, but I was not gonna go back to 3 years of school and do all that again. I guess that would be the advice. I hadn't really thought about it before, but I guess that's what it would be.
I think that's really good advice. I think that too. And I did the same thing to myself of boxing myself in when I was assessing my paths at first. It's like, how is this Bachelor of Science in nursing, in this nursing license, and this nursing experience going to get me anywhere outside of nursing? Because we just don't think about what we're doing and how it applies outside of the four walls of a hospital. So
Yeah.
I do think that if nurses can try to have an awareness of that while they're in it and just kind of try to recognize the things throughout the day that it's like, like I just met a family 2 minutes ago and they already trust me. Like I'm doing something right here. I just explained a situation to a resident over the phone and got the order I wanted. I was
Yeah,
able to achieve buy-in from that stakeholder, like,
for
so
sure.
there's a lot of these things that we do every day that I think, yeah, if we can just be on top of trying to catch ourselves in those moments, it'll make it easier then down the line to communicate how our own experience translates into something new when it comes time for, interview or resume or something like that.
Sure. Well, and I think that's such a hard thing to do is like self-evaluate, especially in the moment, because you don't want to brag on yourself, but you also should be proud of yourself. And one thing that my firm does to this day that I think is really, really cool, and this is just like a little plug for my firm here, is like we do something called a culture index, right? And so when you are exploring a career with our firm, we have you take this culture index and it says, hey, here's what you are naturally hardwired to do. Like, here's what you're really good at. Here's what you're really not good at. Like, are you a logical thinker? Are you an emotional thinker? Are you an introvert, extrovert? Like, do you need like direction or are you autonomous? And so it helps on the hiring side as somebody who's like part of our hiring process. It helps me like look at somebody and go, okay, is this person naturally hardwired to do this like I was? Or are they going to need like some additional coaching? Not that they can't be successful at it. We have plenty of really good advisors who don't have like a quote unquote good culture index, but it helps us know where do you need more support at? And then also like if you're not cut out to do what we do, like what would you be cut out to do? Because I think so many times we're like, yep. And what I found with nursing is like nursing and teachers come in packs, right? So it's like my mom's a nurse, my dad, like I should be a nurse. It's how it runs in our blood. And it's like, well, did you like put any thought into that though before you decided to do it? Probably not. And so self-evaluating is hard, but if you can find somebody who's like willing to objectively evaluate you on like both soft and like it's hard to evaluate hard skills, but like those soft skills,
Mm-hmm.
it allows you to objectively say, okay, what should I pursue? Like what types of careers should I pursue from there?
Yes. Yeah, totally. I even find when I'm working on a nurse's resume, and it's all very clinical based, and the hard clinical skills matter for clinical jobs,
For
but
sure.
it's like, well, but you were working on a med surge unit and managing the care of 8 patients at a time.
Yuck.
Like
Yeah,
there's definitely some soft skills wrapped up in that we can pull out and kind of translate on this piece of paper. So
for sure.
it's one of those things where it can be really useful to work with someone. And the tough thing is, I think, for nurses, which is why I love being able to offer what I do through Pivot Path, is unless you have worked in that environment, it's really hard for someone to just understand what it means that you were a med surg nurse or you were a critical care nurse or you worked in the ER. So if you just have just a general resume service, try to look at your nursing resume and flip it into something else.
Yeah.
It's like, well, are they really going to know what it means that you worked at a level 1 trauma center in the ER and you were always working in a fast-paced, high-pressure environment, So
Yeah.
I think that it's cool for nurses to be able to help nurses when it comes to looking at a career pivot.
Yeah. You kind of need like a nurse translator in that sense. But like everywhere I interviewed, the common theme, I guess, they were like, oh, you were a nurse and you hiked the AT. So like, we know for a fact, this is not going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. And like, and what I think that's important, right? Like, so there's so many nurses that are like, financial planning would be hard. Kinda like it's hard to like learn the knowledge, but it's not hard compared to what you're doing every day right now. And employers recognize that. Like, it's kind of like how I jokingly say, like, it doesn't really matter what you get a degree in. Employers just want to see that you have a degree because it proves that you're able to stick something out for 4 years. You're willing to learn, like, and you're adaptable. Nursing's kind of the same thing. They want to know, are you going to quit when it's hard? Do you learn quickly? Like, nursing is that. So, like, you have way more options than you think you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that that's an awesome note to end on. Nurses do have way more options than they probably think they do. So
for sure,
let's stop boxing ourselves in, recognize our value and pursue some new opportunities to make an impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Zach, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to chat with us today. I think that it's really awesome to share a new path with nurses. And, who would have known that you could go from bedside nursing to finance?
Who would have thought? And thank you for all that you're doing. I wish that you had been around in 2018, 2019. Maybe my life would have been a lot easier. So thank you for doing what you're doing. And if I can be a help to anybody in your world, I'm more than happy to.
If you're interested in connecting with Zach after today's show, you can find him on LinkedIn, on Instagram at Zach Hartley Financial, or on his website at zachhartley.nm.com. His email will also be linked in the show notes below. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, visit the job board at jobs.mypivotpath.com. And if you have any questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.